welcome to Bandana Sunday. Today is a day of charity, it's a day of sharing and caring with everyone because we are back to one of my informative videos that I haven't been doing in a while. And the information this time around is going to be shared about Mythic Plus. The tips and tricks and suggestions for you to improve yourself and your character in Mythic Plus. As I have been doing Mythic Plus for a while on my character, I have somewhat slacked in the past few weeks. I sort of stopped at 3.3 because I started playing on my alt. And what did I see on my alt? On my alt I saw nightmares, I saw doom and despair. I had to start rising my paladin from Mythic Plus 10 and then starting to raise higher and higher, and the levels of horrors I have seen in those low-key dungeons have been unfathomable. It's so much so that my nights are filled with nightmares. In fact, right now, it's 3 in the morning and I can't sleep because I know what haunts me if I go and lay down in my bed. So, as an act of benevolence and charity for everyone, I wanted to share some of the things I use and do in Mythic Plus that might help you make yourself a better player in those dungeons and perhaps avoid giving some other players nightmares when they enter a key with you. So, we have to start with some of the few good things you should make sure you have in Mythic Plus to make sure you understand what's happening, you are knowledgeable about what you're getting yourself into. The first thing, it's on the lighter side, it's WeakAuras. WeakAuras by now is a very popular add-on, so as you can see here, there's plenty of different things that you can do with WeakAuras. You can pretty much do everything in the game you want with WeakAuras. This is my suite for Mythic Plus, this is the one for the raid. But we're talking about the dungeons themselves. So these are the Shadowlands dungeons. This is the WeakAura for Shadowlands dungeons, which I will share with you. It's already publicly available. As you can see, by the time it's taken to load, it basically has every single debuff, ability and mechanic in every single dungeon, including trash mobs. And it will show up inviting you to follow the mechanic. Dodge, split, stack, avoid, kite, whatever. It's gonna show and tell you. That's the first help you can have in Mythic Plus. There are a few more niche things you can pick up for Mythic Plus, like for example the Tazavesh minigames. This one is for the Hilbrande console. So when the 4 colors light up, you click the correct one in order and then you send it in chat for the rest of your group to see. That's gonna be very, very quick. And then you have the trading game in the plaza. It's gonna highlight a red dot in whichever vendor is the correct one, so you can go faster for this minigame. So this is more or less what you can do with WeakAuras at a very, surface level. There are plenty more things you can do with WeakAuras. You can set up mechanics, cooldowns, abilities and whatnot, but for the scope of this video, these are the more important things you can pick up in WeakAuras. And as of course I have said, I will leave behind the links for where to get these WeakAuras for the dungeons. Following up WeakAuras, there is another one which is quite helpful. We are starting to get a little bit more on a higher level because this one perhaps requires a bit more knowledge. I'm talking about OMNICD. There is a very similar equivalent that you can do for this add-on in WeakAuras, but to make it simple, this is much easier to set up. Okay, OMNICD is much faster to make work, even if you don't use add-ons that much, even if you don't use WeakAuras, this is much more simple to do. If you're trying to make it work in a dungeon, all you have to do is go in visibility, disable everything except for dungeons, then you go in dungeons, you go in spells, you have the show of every single one of their abilities and passives or whatnot, and you can select which ones you want to see. And the result is what you see in my Mythic Plus videos. The result is you get all of these icons right next to their party frame. This is automatic. It doesn't matter which party frames you are using, whether you're using Blizzard, Shadowed, Unit frames, X-Pearl, Pitbull, Voodoo, doesn't matter. It's going to automatically snap to the party frames. And as I said, it's a little bit more advanced because this allows you to check, for example, the cooldowns of your party. If you're a tank, for example, you can see the cooldowns of your group. You can see the defensives. If you're a healer, you can see if they have used some of their bigger stuff, for example. You can see if they have used their stuns, etc., etc. As long as you have enabled them in here you will be able to see. So this is also going to help you, give you an understanding of what is happening in the key by knowing what your party can do. In case you didn't know, Mythic Plus is done with 5 people, so just knowing yourself isn't enough. There are 4 more people you're supposed to be playing with, so when you're in a pug, when you are with complete strangers and you have no idea what they are doing, this can also help you, give you an idea of what is going on with them. Now, to make it even easier for lazy people, if you really don't want to click all of these buttons and start to think for yourself which ones you have to do, no problem. I'm going to export my profile and leave it behind in the description for you to take and then import in OMNICD to make it work for you. Another one of the add-ons you can use, and here we go a little bit more into the advanced mode, is Plater. So Plater is a unit name and health bar add-on. So when I open Plater, you might get overwhelmed by the amount of settings there are and amount of things you can take for all sorts of different things, okay? There is tons of stuff. It's very confusing, it's gonna take you a while to get used to it. Plater is particularly good because it has a very good modding system. You can mod extra things into it, for example, change and add the execute range to the bars, to the health bars. You can change things like the color. Where is it? You can change the current target color so that when you are currently targeting a mob amongst 15 in a pool of Mythic Plus, that health bar color is changing, so you can distinguish what you're targeting. You can also have specific targeting color difference, for example, changing the color of the enemies that are attacking the monks' statues or the shaman's elementals to make you know that they're not hitting the tank at the moment, but they're also not hitting DPS or healers. So that's also another thing you can do with modding. Plenty of different options you can have. You can play around with this yourself and try all of the different settings, or just like for OMNICD, you can be lazy and copy my profile and take it and import it, and it's gonna work as you see in my videos. Now, after Plater, we have something that many people have been scared by. It's almost taboo to tell players this. I'm talking about Mythic dungeon tools. Now, hear me out. Many people think, many of the more casual players think that this is too much, okay? Look at this, what is this? What is this? Is my job? I have to learn all of this? Well, what is this for? I'm not using Mythic dungeon tools for the routes. Many times, especially in pugs, the route is something that is going to be left to the tank, so that's an extra responsibility put on the tank players, while most of the other players can just follow along. They don't have to do too much for it. Plus, at lower key levels, for players to improve in Mythic Plus before they get into the 20 range, this is not even that needed, it's not even that important. Why I want you to use Mythic Dungeon Tools isn't to learn the routes, that's not what it's for. What you can use this for is to learn the mobs themselves, because what not many people know is that when you go and search and look around the mobs, for example, the Depraved Houndmaster, besides looking how much percentage it can give, how much HP it has if you change the key level, what you can also see is basically the abilities, what they do and what they can be affected by, what crowd controls they can be affected by, if they have stealth detect, for example. That's very helpful. When you go mob by mob, the Depraved Obliterator, these are the abilities, they are interruptible, both of them. That's good information. What about the Depraved Collector? Collect Sins is interruptible, Siphon Life is not. This is all quite helpful, I believe. Even the CCs that can be affected by, for example, when you look at the Shard of Alkias, cannot be crowd controlled whatsoever. So this can be quite useful for players as they learn the dungeons. That's why I suggest it. Not as much for the routes, not as much for this, which is something you will learn eventually as you do more keys, but rather for essentially getting used to knowing, to understanding what every one of these mobs can do just by looking at them and looking at what things they have, what things can be interrupted, what they can be crowd controlled by. That's why I think it's quite useful. Also for tanks, you know, you can shrink the window, tie it to a keybind, and then use it whenever. You know, it's very useful for when you're running your key and you're getting to know the routes, you're getting to learn your routes. You can pop it in and out again as you go by the dungeon, remind yourself where you have to go. It is quite helpful as well. So this is another add-on I'm gonna leave behind for you. Most of the time, if you enter a dungeon, most of the tanks, if you ask, will send you a link to a route, so you will end up getting plenty of them over time. You don't have to do them yourself, okay? It's just gonna get filled up whenever people send you stuff, so that is also good for you. Lastly, we can finish this extra tips with something that isn't an add-on but is a macro. I think you can also do it with add-ons, but macro is the old school way. This macro is for MOUSEOVER. This is very important in Mythic Plus because there are plenty of things that you want to take down quickly and you don't want to change targets, especially when you're pulling something like 7 or 8 mobs. You know, when you're pulling 2 mobs, you can use your tab, you know, your tab targeting. You target one and then you tab and you target the other. That's quite simple. But if you're pulling 7 of them, how do you tab target? How do you cycle through all of them? It is much harder, it is much more complicated. So what you can do instead is use a MOUSEOVER macro, like a MOUSEOVER macro for Flame Shock. This is going to target and hit with Flame Shock whatever I have targeted on my mouse cursor. If I don't have anyone on my mouse cursor, it's going to hit my target. This is the same for Frost Shock, which is very useful for explosive weeks. As a healer, you can use this to MOUSEOVER on the explosives and take them down. And then of course I have Purge for dispelling, for the offensive dispels of things I want to dispel. And then of course, obviously, the interrupt. It's another useful thing to have on your MOUSEOVER macro. This will allow you to control what you're targeting, what you're hitting, and be useful to the rest of the group with things that are very underappreciated in the lower level of keys. So CCs, stuns, slows, interrupts, purges, dispels, all stuff that gets completely forgotten at lower keys. And I'm ashamed to admit, even in higher keys, there are plenty of wipes and people dying because one of these things is not done properly, which hurts a lot in higher keys. So don't be complacent that even if you fail and mess this up in lower keys and you're not wiping and you're not dying, then it's the right way to go. It actually isn't. You will get to take and bring with you a very bad habit by the time you start climbing into higher keys, because in those keys it will be necessary to deal with all this stuff, and you will not be used to it. You will not be equipped to deal with it because you have just ignored it for way too long. So even though technically it's not really necessary to do this in lower keys, you should learn early. You should get the habit early on to be useful with these type of things, and MOUSEOVER macros are the best way to effectively target multiple enemies in and out, left and right, without losing track of your current target. These were the most important things I feel you should bring with you in Mythic Plus. So, WeakAuras for your dungeons, for knowing what the dungeons do and getting a good information on it with the icons showing up. OMNICD for the exact same thing, except the information is going to be about your party members. And then Mythic Dungeon Tools for extra information on each of the mobs present in the dungeon, plus eventually to learn the routes of the key. And then lastly you have Plater for nameplates and health plates on targets and enemies to also give you some infos, for example, about casts, which casts are interruptible, which casts are not, certain debuffs that are dispellable, which ones are not, etc, etc. That helps a lot. And lastly you have the macros. There are of course plenty of other things you can use, like as you can see here, you can use details for the damage, the deaths, the damage taken, etc, etc, but this has nothing to do about your performance in Mythic Plus. But for the combat part, okay, for the competitive part of Mythic Plus, those are the add-ons I would use a lot for how good and how more easily readable they make the environment, both the enemies and your allies. So these were the tips for today about Mythic Plus. With this being said, it's time to leave. I guess I will have to go and try to sleep in a bit, hoping that nightmares have subsided a little bit for myself. For now, however, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Sunday. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video and for helping to grow the channel, which also include liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel, which obviously, this one being a video about tips for Mythic Plus, I'm going to let you subscribe to the channel to anyone who has already had one of those tips for themselves and is already playing with some of these add-ons in their UI. And this was all. Thank you guys again. See you guys soon. And in the meantime, Okay, maybe not nightmares, but I did wake up. I did try to sleep, and I woke up a couple of hours later. So perhaps it actually had to do with my awful Mythic Plus groups on my alt.